All right, this is just going to be a quick video to go over my thinking in 1-8 because 1-8 has so much writing in it that I went through and I did the writing first because I could not bear to do it live on video. So let's just talk about why these answers are the way they are. So number 11, write an indirect proof for this conditional statement about the given figure. Now, for any of these, we first have to decide whether we want to do a proof by contradiction or a proof by contrapositive. In number 11, this is a proof by contradiction. I decided. You can choose for yourself how you want to do it. In a proof by contradiction, you assume that the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false. So I kind of didn't write the first part in there. I probably should have written assume NJ is the perpendicular bisector of KM and LM does not equal 6, but it's basically the same thing. So assuming that LM does not equal 6 means that KL and LM then are not congruent to each other, right? This and this are not congruent. And that NL does not intersect KM at its midpoint because this would no longer be the midpoint. And since NJ does not intersect KM at its midpoint, NJ is not going to be the perpendicular bisector. But we already assumed that NJ was the perpendicular bisector, which is a contradiction. So as soon as we found a contradiction, that means we've proven that LM is actually 6, right? The proof doesn't work when LM does not equal 6, so LM must be 6. Number 13, this one tells us to write a proof by contrapositive to prove the following. So when we write a proof by contrapositive, the first thing we need to do is assume the negation of the conclusion. So we need to assume that X does equal Y. And if X does equal Y, then I can go in here, and every time I see the letter X, I can put in a Y. So the measure of TUV is Y squared plus Y times Y. I substituted. And that makes it, if you simplify it, the measure of angle TUV equals 2Y squared. We can do the same thing over here, put a Y in for both the X's, and that makes this 3Y times Y plus Y. And if we simplify that, we get 6Y squared. So the measure of angle TUV is 2Y squared, and then WXY is 6Y squared. Those are not equal to each other, which means that angle TUV is not congruent to angle WXY, which proves the contrapositive, right? I started by assuming the negation of the conclusion, and I found out that that means the negation of the hypothesis. And if the contrapositive is true, then the original statement is also true. Number 14, Anna started by assuming X is even. She assumed the conclusion was true, but that's not how we do an indirect proof. In indirect proofs, we always assume the conclusion is false. So we should have assumed X is not even, which would be the start of a contrapositive proof. And then I just kind of threw this fun fact in here. If she assumed X was odd, she could have called this 2K plus 1 to make an odd number. Numbers 17 and 18, the first step of an indirect proof is always going to be assuming the negation, right? Assume the negation of the statement you're given. Assume ST plus TU plus UV does not equal 150. Assume ray DE is not the angle bisector of ADC. Number 19, numbers 1 and 3 contradict each other because statement 1 says these two angles together equal 150, but statement 3 says just one of the angles equals 180. So that can't happen because we know the measure of angle K must be smaller than 150. Number 22, write a proof of the contrapositive. So again, we start by assuming the negation of the conclusion and following logically from there. So assume EF does not equal 14. Since AB and CD are 6 and 8 respectively, if we add those together, we get 14 by the segment addition postulate, adding segments together. We already assumed that EF was not 14. So we know that this angle plus this angle, since they equal 14, are not equal to EF by substitution, which is the negation of the hypothesis. We proved the contrapositive, therefore the original conditional must be true. Number 25, I chose to do a proof by contradiction just because I wanted to do something different than I had been doing for the past couple. So I'm assuming that the hypothesis is true, okay, and the conclusion is false. So I assume she gets to the library, but she does not have 2 miles left to go. I got to show why that's not going to work. So if she does not have less than 2 miles left to go, she must have greater than or equal to 2 miles left. We already know that the library is at the midpoint between the home and the museum. So by the definition of midpoint, since this is 1.6 miles, then the distance from the library to the museum is 1.6 miles. But if that distance is 1.6 miles, that's not greater than or equal to 2 miles. So I was wrong in my original statement. I made a contradiction. Therefore, Nikki has less than 2 miles left to go. Number 26, does this pair of statements contradict each other? I just wrote a long explanation, but obviously yes, right? 2 angles that are obtuse can't be supplementary because 2 angles that are obtuse are going to add up to more than 180 and not exactly 180. And finally, if we want to write a proof of the following by proving the contrapositive, our first assumption should be the negation of the conclusion. Assume that the measure of angle HJK plus the measure of angle KGL does not equal 90. Letter D there. So yeah, that one is a lot of writing. And again, your writing doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine. It just has to go through the process that we talked about in class where we're making the correct assumptions and following through to the correct conclusions. All right, if you have any questions, let me know. That is the end of chapter 1.